Windows has been the default on PCs for years, but what if this little mini PC doesn't need Windows at all? Today I'm going to take this mini PC, boot it from a USB stick, test Linux before installing it, wipe Windows and turn it into a proper Linux desktop PC. For this guide, I'm deliberately not using the newest or fastest mini PC I own. I'm using this older Beelink U55 because this is much closer to the kind of small Windows box people actually have under a TV, in a drawer, or sitting unused after Windows started feeling too heavy. But I'm also going to show you the things most beginner guides skip. What to do if the Wi-Fi doesn't work, what settings to check for a TV or monitor, and why you should tick the codecs box. Installing Linux can erase your drive, so back up anything important first. I'm using a spare mini PC, so I'm happy to wipe it. Right, let's turn this into a Linux PC. Before we download anything, 3 quick rules. Rule number 1, Linux is the operating system. Linux Mint is the beginner-friendly version I'm installing today. There are loads of versions of Linux called distros, but for a Windows user on a mini PC, Linux Mint Cinnamon is one of the easiest places you can start. You get a normal desktop, a start menu style layout, settings, updates, an app store, and it doesn't feel like you need to learn a new language just to open a browser. Rule number 2, test before you install. Linux Mint lets you boot from a USB stick and try the desktop before you wipe the computer. So before installing anything, we're going to test Wi-Fi, sound, Bluetooth, and YouTube playback. Rule number 3, don't do this on a machine you rely on unless you've checked your apps first. This isn't about turning an old mini PC into a monster gaming or 4K editing machine. This is about making it useful again for browsing, YouTube, documents, light media playback, and everyday desktop use. If you only browse the web, watch videos, write documents, and use basic apps, Linux could be brilliant. If you rely on Windows-only apps, certain games, work software, or specialist hardware, test first. First, go to the official Linux Mint website. Don't download Linux from random re-upload sites or dodgy download pages. Use the official site. I'm choosing Linux Mint Cinnamon. Cinnamon is the version I'd recommend for most beginners because it feels familiar if you're coming from Windows. Click Download. Choose the Cinnamon edition. Then you'll see a list of download mirrors. These are just different servers hosting the same Linux Mint file, so choose one close to your country and download it from there. The file you're downloading is called an ISO. An ISO is basically the Linux Mint installer file, but it is not something you open and install inside Windows like a normal app. Instead, the ISO has to be written to a USB stick so the mini PC can boot from it. For that, we're going to use a free tool called Rufus. Rufus is a small Windows app that takes the Linux Mint ISO and turns your USB stick into a bootable installer. Go to the official Rufus website and download the standard Windows x64 version. Don't worry if the version number is slightly different from mine, just choose the latest standard Windows x64 download. Once it has downloaded, open it. In most cases, Rufus does not need installing. You just double-click the Rufus file you downloaded. When Windows asks, do you want to allow this app to make changes to your device, click yes. That's normal. Rufus needs permission because it has to write the Linux Mint installer to the USB stick properly. If Rufus asks to check for application updates online, click yes. That's only checking whether Rufus itself has an update. Now plug in your USB stick. At the top of Rufus, make sure your USB stick is selected. Under Boot Selection, click Select. Then choose the Linux Mint ISO file we downloaded earlier. Once you choose the ISO, Rufus will fill in some of the settings automatically. On my screen, Rufus is showing MBR and BIOS or UEFI. That's fine because it means the USB should be able to boot on a wider range of computers, including many mini PCs. For a beginner, I would leave the Rufus settings as they are unless you know your device specifically needs something different. Now click Start. If Rufus says the image is an ISO hybrid and asks whether to write in ISO image mode or DD image mode, choose ISO image mode. Then click OK. That's the recommended option for most beginners. If Rufus says the Linux Mint image uses a different version of Grub or SYS Linux and asks whether it should download the required files, click yes. Again, that's normal. Rufus is just downloading the matching boot files it needs to create the USB installer properly. Rufus will now warn you that all data on this device will be destroyed. This means the USB stick is going to be wiped, so make sure Rufus has selected the correct USB drive at the top. If it's definitely the correct drive, click OK. Now Rufus will create the Linux Mint USB installer. Once this finishes, the status will show ready, and we've now got our Linux Mint USB installer. Leave the USB stick plugged in. If you created it on a different computer, plug it into the machine you want to install Linux on now. Use a wired keyboard and mouse if possible, because Bluetooth devices may not work yet. Now restart the computer and open the boot menu. On small PCs like this, the boot menu is usually one of these keys. The exact key depends on the brand, so if one doesn't work, restart and try another. When the boot menu appears, you may see options like Windows Boot Manager, UEFI USB Partition 1 and Enter Setup. Windows Boot Manager will just start Windows again. Enter Setup takes you into the BIOS settings. For this guide, choose UEFI USB Partition 1. That's the USB stick we just created. After that, you may see a GNU Grub menu. This is normal. It's just the Linux Mint boot menu. Choose Start Linux Mint 22.3 Cinnamon 64-bit and press Enter. Only try compatibility mode if the normal option freezes, gives you a black screen or refuses to load. Do not choose OEM install for this guide. Now Linux Mint should start loading from the USB stick. And now we're inside Linux Mint. But this is important, we have not installed anything yet. This is running from the USB stick. Before we install, we test the mini PC. First, Internet. Click the network icon and see if Wi-Fi appears. If your Wi-Fi works, great, connect to your network. But if you don't see Wi-Fi, don't panic. This is one of the biggest mini PC Linux problems. Some budget mini PCs use Wi-Fi chips that Linux Mint might not detect immediately. So here's the rescue trick. If the mini PC has Ethernet, the easiest fix is to plug in an Ethernet cable. But if you don't have Ethernet nearby, you may be able to use your phone instead. Connect the phone to the mini PC with a USB cable. Then, if you have an Android phone, go to Settings, Connections, Mobile Hotspot and Tethering, USB tethering, then turn that option on. On an iPhone, go to Settings, Personal Hotspot, turn on Allow Others to Join, and if the phone asks you to trust the computer, tap Trust. In a lot of cases, Linux will see the phone connection as a wired internet connection. So even if the Wi-Fi driver is missing, you can still get online, run updates, and later use Driver Manager to check for extra drivers. Next, test sound. Open the browser and play a YouTube video. Make sure audio comes through the right place, your monitor, TV, speakers, or HDMI device.
Our shepherd was murdered, and we shall solve the crime.
Also check that the picture looks normal on your screen. If you're connected to a 4K TV and the desktop looks tiny, don't worry about fixing that yet. The main thing right now is that the display works. We'll adjust scaling properly after Linux is installed. If you need Bluetooth for a keyboard, mouse, controller, or remote, you can also quickly check whether Bluetooth is showing up. The goal here is simple. Before we erase the drive, make sure the important hardware works. If internet, sound, display, and your basic controls are working, then we can install Linux properly. Now double-click Install Linux Mint. Choose your language. Choose your keyboard layout. Now you'll see an option for multimedia codecs. Make sure to tick this box. If you skip it, some media files may not play properly later, or you might get missing audio or video support and think that Linux is broken. Now you'll see the installation type screen. Because this computer still has Windows on it, Linux Mint has detected Windows Boot Manager. You may see three options. Install Linux Mint alongside Windows Boot Manager means it will try to keep Windows and install Linux next to it. That's called dual booting, but I'm not covering that in this beginner guide because it adds extra steps and more ways to make a mistake. Erase disk and install Linux Mint means Windows will be removed and Linux Mint will take over the whole drive. That's the option I'm using today because this is a spare mini PC and I want a clean Linux install. Something else is the manual partition option. Beginners should avoid that unless they already know what they're doing. For this guide, I'm choosing Erase Disk and Install Linux Mint. Only choose this if you're happy to wipe Windows and everything else on this drive. Linux Mint will now show a final warning, write the changes to disks. This is the point where it confirms the drive is going to be changed. If you're not ready to erase Windows, click Go Back. If you're happy to wipe the drive, click Continue. After this, Linux Mint will start installing to the internal drive. Choose your time zone. Create your username and password, and make sure you use a password you'll actually remember because Linux will ask you for it when you install updates or make system changes. Now click Continue. Now Linux Mint is copying everything to the mini PC. I'm going to speed this bit up because there's nothing useful to watch. When it finishes, click Restart. When it tells you to remove the USB stick, unplug it and press Enter. And there it is. This mini PC is no longer running Windows. It's now a Linux Mint desktop PC. But don't stop here. The install is only half the job. Now we need to do the first setup checklist. First, open Update Manager. You can usually do this from the Welcome screen by clicking First Steps, then Update Manager. If you've already closed the Welcome screen, click the menu button in the bottom left corner, search for Update Manager and open it from there. Click Refresh if it asks. If Linux Mint says a new version of Update Manager is available, apply the update first. When it asks for your password, enter the password you created during the Linux Mint installation. If Linux Mint suggests switching to a local mirror, that just means it can use a download server closer to you, which may be faster. Once Update Manager shows the list of available updates, click Install Updates. When the updates finish, restart the computer if Linux Mint asks you to. Next, click First Steps, then launch Driver Manager. This is where Linux Mint checks for extra hardware drivers. On many mini PCs, you won't need to change anything, but if Wi-Fi, graphics, or another device needs help, this is the place to check. And if you still don't have Wi-Fi, use Ethernet or the phone USB tethering trick from earlier so that Driver Manager can get online. Once you've finished using the welcome screen, untick Show this dialog box at Startup at the bottom. Then close the welcome screen. You can still find these tools later from the main menu. Now go to Display Settings. Click the menu button in the bottom left corner, then click System Settings. From there, open Display. If you're using a normal monitor, 100% scaling will probably be fine. If you're using a 4K TV across the room and everything looks tiny, you can try 200% scaling. That will make text and menus much larger. If 200% is too big, you can leave it at 100% for now and adjust things like browser zoom, icon size, or text size later. The main thing is to make sure the screen resolution looks correct and the desktop is comfortable enough to use. Next, check your sound output. Click the menu button in the bottom left corner, then open System Settings. Go to Sound. Under the Output section, make sure Linux Mint is using the correct device. If you're connected to a TV or monitor with HDMI, choose the HDMI output. If you're using speakers, choose those instead. Then play a YouTube video or click the sound test option if available and make sure the audio comes from the right place.
Front, right, front, right.
Next, adjust the power settings. Click the menu button in the bottom left corner, then open System Settings. Go to Power Management. From here, you can choose when the screen turns off, when the computer suspends, and what happens when you press the power button. If this mini PC is going to sit under a TV or act as a lightweight media PC, you may want to stop it going to sleep too quickly. One quick mini PC tip: don't hide the box somewhere with no airflow. These little machines can run warm, especially behind a TV or inside a cabinet. For this beginner setup, the main thing is to make sure the vents are not blocked. Now let's install some apps. Click the menu button in the bottom left corner, search for Software Manager and open it. This is basically the Linux Mint App Store. For a beginner setup, I'd start with the basics. Install VLC for media playback, install LibreOffice if you want documents and spreadsheets, install your preferred browser if you don't want to use the default one, and then install whatever you actually want to use this mini PC for. And yes, if you want to run Android apps on Linux, there are ways to do that as well. One option people often use is Waydroid, which can run Android in a Linux container. But I'm not going to squeeze that into this beginner install guide because Android apps on Linux deserve a proper separate tutorial. If you want me to make that video next, comment Android apps on Linux below. The point for today is simple. You don't need to become a Linux expert on day one. Just install the basics and set this mini PC up for the things you actually use. So, should you install Linux on an old mini PC? If it's a spare machine or something that feels slow on Windows, I think it's absolutely worth trying. For browsing, YouTube, email, documents, light media playback, and general desktop use, Linux Mint makes a lot of sense. But I wouldn't pretend it's perfect for everyone. If you rely on specific Windows apps, Game Pass, Adobe apps, specialist work software, or unusual hardware, test everything from the live USB before wiping Windows. That's the best part of doing it this way. You can boot it, test it, and then decide. And that's how this older Beelink went from a small Windows box to a usable Linux desktop PC. Now I want to know what you want to see next. If you want a separate tutorial on running Android apps on Linux using Waydroid, comment Waydroid below. If enough people want it, I'll make that next. If this helped, hit the like button, subscribe for more mini PC, streaming device and setup guides, and I'll see you in the next one.